When the Sega Saturn hit UK shelves on July of 1995, it ambitiously tried to replicate the absolute cutting edge in arcade technology. And while we love the original Virtua Fighter and Daytona USA ports here at the Sega Guys, we remember all too well the jibes and sneers from gaming magazines and school friends alike, all of whom felt they had the better end of the deal with Tekken and Ridge Racer. However, no one could have foreseen the quality of the triple threat of titles that Sega had up its sleeve, all set to release within months of one another and within 6 months of the PAL system hitting store shelves. In November of 1995, the official UK Sega magazine rebranded to the official Sega Saturn magazine. Its debut issue featured showcases on 3 Model 2 ports, which would go on amongst Saturn owners to affectionately be known as the Big Three. There was also a cover-mounted VHS tape, which had early development footage of each title, and I'll tell you, I near wore that tape out back in the day. You genuinely could not believe what you were seeing. Here we had Sega's 3 biggest and best Model 2 arcade games to date, running amazingly on the Sega Saturn. In this video, I'll take you back to look at each title that impact my memories and tell you why these are possibly the most important AAA titles in the Sega Saturn's library. Virtua Fighter 2 was a game that I had played many times in Booth's Enterprises arcade in Glasgow city centre, and the thought of getting this one at home was mind-blowing. Flicking through the pages of Sega Saturn magazine and its 6-page showcase, the screenshots showed a port insanely faithful to the arcade, but it wasn't until you seen Saturn VF2 move that you truly became a believer. The cover-mounted VHS showed movement demos of Pi and Lau going through their paces on Jeffrey stage. Various demo bouts would follow between different characters, and while the hitboxes are absent, the fighters land throws on one another with a level of fluidity beyond anything seen so far that generation. Running in the Saturn's high resolution mode at 704x480 or 704x512 in PAL regions due to Sega's brilliant PAL optimisation, and at a rock solid 60 FPS, the port actually outperforms the Model 2 version in terms of sheer resolution. Of course, the Saturn makes several cutbacks in order to hit peak performance, but none of them hinder gameplay or diminish the quality of the port. Backgrounds are drawn in 2D, but are detailed with clever use of parallax scrolling to simulate depth. The lighting engine is removed entirely, and Shun-Di stages reworked, taking place on the shore rather than a raft floating downstream under various large bridges. Virtua Fighter 2 on Saturn is a joy to play, with responsive controls, a varied roster of fighters, hundreds of moves to learn, and the added bonus of not just version 2.1 to choose from, but optional AI learning to make your fights even more challenging as the Sega Saturn learns how you play. I got my hands on my copy at the tail end of January 1996, a few weeks after launch, and it's hard to put into words just how it felt seeing VF2 running in your own home with your own eyes. After playing and loving the original Virtua Fighter, VF2 was like a generational leap within its own generation, and here's the thing. Despite having access to Model 2 emulation and the Xbox 360 port, I still prefer to play on the Saturn. To me, it'll always be my favourite way to play the game. Virtua Fighter 2 on Saturn remained the premier fighting experience of the 32-bit generation for years to come, and PlayStation owners had to wait until 1998's Tekken 3 for their system to have something that could even come close. It's no surprise that VF2 went on to become the biggest selling Saturn game globally. It's an absolute gem of a port. When I first laid eyes on Sega Rally, I had no idea it would go on to become my favourite game ever, and like Virtua Fighter 2, it would take all the media and retail misconceptions of the Saturn and tear them to pieces. Sega Rally on Saturn brings across all the tracks and cars faithfully from the arcade version, and this one plays as great as it looks. It too was featured on the Sega Saturn magazine VHS, but we'd get to play this one before release thanks to the bootleg sampler demo disc that came with issue 3. To a teenager who'd been playing Lotus Turbo Challenge 2 on the Amiga 6 months before, this was jaw-dropping to behold, and was another game that I enjoyed in the arcade and could never have imagined having at home. The cars and tracks are incredibly detailed, and the game runs at a solid 30 frames per second with respectable draw distance and minimal pop-in. In fact, the Saturn port of Sega Rally is all the more remarkable when you consider it was actually built from the ground up on Saturn by Sega's CS team, guided by AM3's very own Tetsuya Mizuguchi. An interview in issue 27 of Edge goes into detail about the development of the Saturn version, Mizuguchi-san's involvement, and the team assembled to port the game. When asked by Edge if Sega Rally is using AM2's Sega graphics library, Mizuguchi-san replies, "Not at all. The SGL was incomplete when we began the project, but even without the new SGL we succeeded in making a very good conversion. We have some very good programmers." Edge go on to ask how many people are working in the team and what experience they have with racing games. Mizuguchi-san responds, "We have about 6 designers and programmers. One of the staff, Mr. Hattori, did Virtua Racing Deluxe on the Mega Drive. Personally, I am a supervisor and the only member of staff from the AM3 team. So around 6 people, supervised by Mizuguchi-san, without the aid of the SGL, built Sega Rally from the ground up on the Sega Saturn. Just look at this running and let that sink in. And in one key way, the Saturn port actually outdoes the arcade original, and that's gameplay and more specifically, handling. The Saturn port of Sega Rally allows you to feel which road surface you're on somehow without the need for any form of sensory input. On a standard Saturn D-pad you can feel the difference between mud, grit and asphalt, and it makes the gameplay all the more rewarding. Sega Rally is a game that gets its hooks into you and never leaves. As you master each track, you come to realise that position is a given, and your true opponent is yourself and your best time. This is Time Attack arcade racing at its best, and it's the best racing game on Saturn, if not the 32-bit generation. Period. Virtua Cop was one of the first Saturn games to use the aforementioned Sega graphics library, being first shown in the summer of 1995 at the Tokyo Toy Show. Like Virtua Fighter 2 and Sega Rally before it, Virtua Cop painstakingly recreates the look and feel of the arcade to stunning effect, and, like Sega Rally, the game was put together by a relatively small team, but in the case of Virtua Cop, a team of rookies at Sega, some of whom were embarking on their first major project. If you want to know more about the development of Virtua Cop, I highly recommend that you check out Pandamonium's 4-hour epic, where he chats to members of the team and delves into the challenges of the port. Trust me, it's well worth your time. Hearing how these young men dealt with learning the SGL and using VDP 1 and 2 to get visual effects thought not possible on Saturn is amazing, and they were supervised by Yu Suzuki no less. As for the game itself, you fight your way across 3 stages of varying difficulty, taking out thugs and bosses along the way. The game came bundled with the Virtua gun, known as the Sega Stunner in the US, which came in a tone of blue, near identical to the Player 1 gun on the cabinet, which also mirrors its shape and design. You rack up points and increase your multiplier the longer you take no damage and take out enemies with just the shots, a one-shot disarm, and my favourite, the Robocop-like triple shot. Playing the game as intended today requires a CRT, as no solution exists as of yet for retro console light guns to work with modern televisions. That said, the game is playable enough with a controller if it's your only option. I mean, Yu Suzuki himself insisted that the game be playable using a controller. These 3 games should have been the start the Saturn deserved, as they truly showed what the system was capable of and that it could easily match anything on offer visually on PlayStation. To this day, the big 3 remain 3 of my favourite games of all time, and that period of December 95 and January 1996 gave me some of the best gaming memories of my life. If you've made it to the end, thank you so much for watching. I'd love to hear your memories of the big 3, so please get involved in the comments. You can find myself on X or Twitter at the SEGAHolic. You can find Dan, the Mega Driver, at Swooper_D. The pod account is of course at Sega Guys, and until next time, we will see you on the Sega side.